So yes, it is 1:30, so I guess we can go ahead and get started now. So thank you everyone for joining this session. My name is David Baroni, based at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I'm also one of the co-chairs of the Information Quality Cluster, the IQC cluster, which is basically the organizer of this session entitled Toward Improving Representation of Data Quality Information. And so along with me today, I have Peng, Bob Downs, Rama. Yaxing Wei is actually unavailable today. He's not able to join us today due to a conflict, but he is actually the chair of this cluster. And so with that, you have also the short URL there to the Schedule session page for more information, as well as how to get to the agenda and the notes for today's session as well. Okay, so here is the actual agenda. So this is the welcome to the session that we're in right now. The goal of the session is really to share with the EASP community kind of where are we at currently with our status of the cluster, and what are kind of the activities that are underway, all of our collaborative efforts that are ongoing, and also try to obtain some feedback with the community as well. We will have some presentations. So I'll be leading the first presentation on data uncertainty, this follow-on white paper that we have. Actually, there's a couple follow-on papers that you'll learn about that are ongoing, as well as some international collaborations for data quality. And then there's going to be a presentation so that'll be presented by Bob Downs, and then presented by Peng will be a fair data quality information guidelines. And then also we will break out for approximately 44 minutes, it appears, to cover the dataset lifecycle stages review, reviewing some of the quality characteristics, and so there will be some time for discussion in that. I will note that if we can stay on time with our presentations, hopefully our presentations will be less than 10 minutes each, and if that's the case, we could probably have time for a question or so per presentation. And if you do have a question, please be kind to use the raise your hand option, or just enter it first in the chat box. And then the moderators for each presentation will be able to help field those questions as well. So with that, I will proceed forward with my presentation. So this is going to be reviewing the follow-on work for the data uncertainty white paper. All right, so as a starting point, I just wanted to remind folks, because I know a lot of you here are probably new to this cluster and to the work that we are engaged in. And I just wanted to showcase first our foundational white paper published on Figshare. Last year, I believe it was published in November of 2019, actually more than a year ago. The title of that paper is Understanding the Various Perspectives of Earth Science Observational Data Uncertainty. And so there's a variety of things that we revealed from that. It was more of a discovery expository paper. No concrete recommendations or best practices came forth from it, just because we really just wanted to try to cast the net as wide as possible with what we could actually discover from this. And part of that was discovering quite a bit of diversity between uncertainty quantification, which is what we mean by UQ, as well as uncertainty characterization, which is what we mean by UC, as well as...
David?
Yes.
We seem to be having some trouble with the slides.
Okay. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to disable my video. There might be a bandwidth issue there, and see if that fixes it. Can everybody see?
They're getting
now?
Sort of partially cut off is the issue.
Okay. Maybe what I'll do is I'll exit the presenter mode and see if that's better.
Yeah, that looks good.
And if I re-enter presenter mode, does it get cut off again?
Yes.
It does. Okay, so I'm going to stay out of presenter mode, and that's good to know. I'll just keep it. So at this juncture, at this view, nothing is cut off, correct? With this view, okay. So we'll proceed with this version of the presentation. Thank you for that. All right, so there is also a lot of statistical techniques associated with UQ/UC that we had captured and defined, but there's also knowledge-based techniques that were acknowledged as well. The recognition of UQ/UC was recognized as a fundamental step toward providing a variety of vital information to better characterize scientific quality of earth science data being collected, evaluated, assimilated, and applied by the end user. The information ultimately does depend primarily on effective communication dissemination of that information. So we also realize that very few users that those of us had interacted with in our careers had a proper understanding of the probabilistic nature, the probabilistic framework that establishes the correct interpretation of the data. When we say programmatic, what we mean is not so much the software and the coding. What we mean by that is kind of how these initiatives for UQUC are funded, how they're governed, at the agency level, the institutional level. So when we say that, that's what we mean by programmatic. So programmatically, there seems to be a growing trend in requesting or even requiring the presence of uncertainty information with a variety of Earth system data records, particularly those that contain what's known as an essential climate variable or an ECV. What we didn't really cover to a large extent was the suborbital and in situ data perspectives, but we did realize, we acknowledge that they do have their own smaller niche communities as well, which need to be explored as they have their own unique priorities to consider. So as a result of that, the last summer meeting, we had a session to kind of dive a little deeper into those lesser explored perspectives on suborbital and in situ data. So this is this was actually a two-part session featuring two speakers speaking to this. We had a winter meeting last year as well that covered more on the suborbital and in situ side. So this session actually covered a third category known as modeling and data assimilation, which was also a lesser explored topic. So some key takeaways here are that we did consider some new use cases of perspectives that we didn't previously explore, such as suborbital in situ modeling and data assimilation. And we had breakouts to kind of go deeper into that as well. But there's also this emerging need to resolve the differences in spatiotemporal scales between in situ, airborne, satellite, and model assimilated data. Each of those have their own unique spatial-temporal scales, but with correlation techniques, spatial correlations, and covariance techniques, those types of things can be resolvable, even though the scales themselves are different. There's also discipline-dependent open source tools that are needed to support algorithm developers, to support UQ workflows and consistent representation in the data files. And then also going along with this, we realized having a common vocabulary in place would help address these needs significantly as well to fit that purpose. There was also a related session on dealing with uncertainty from the perspective of how the information is packaged in NetCDF files. NetCDF being one of the most common files that's used to address interoperability issues, as well as standardizing how metadata is expressed in data files. It's also one of the more common ones that most of the stakeholders in this group are using to package their data. We realize that uncertainty can be packaged in NetCDF files, and so there was a proposal here to address that. So getting to the status of the follow-on papers. So there's going to be two follow-on papers. So there's supplemental perspectives dealing with what we just mentioned already, adding these additional in situ suborbital modeling and data assimilation perspectives. We have an outline drafted and finalized. We had a kickoff meeting in December, just a couple months ago almost, and we received commitment from up to 10 co-authors at this point, with content contribution from 4 people, and those same 4 people also agreed to be reviewers as well. We are still in the process of preparing writing assignments. We're nearly there. We had a little delay on my end, trying to schedule things too close to the holidays, as well as getting too close to a quarterly project review for planning quarterly deliverables. So, but we are getting back on track with that, trying to see if we can target our publication to Figshare by between the April and May timeframe. And then we have this second part 2, or I guess you could say this is kind of closing the loop. This is called the best practices and recommendations paper that kind of takes into account all of the perspectives previously explored and utilizing those to provide concrete recommendations and best practices with the intention to make sure that they're consistent with all previously documented perspectives, how the information is packaged and produced, how it's disseminated, and then how it's going to be ultimately interpreted in a manner that is harmonized, sustainable, and scalable. When we say scalable, we're talking about the variety of and veracity of data, the volume of data, and its how it transcends cross domains and cross disciplines. So it does definitely need to be scalable in that respect. So we have an outline drafted for that. It's under review. We're preparing to hold a kickoff meeting to assign to figure out our writing assignments hopefully early next month, or at least no later than mid next month in February. And for this one, this is going to obviously come later because we need to have those additional perspectives captured first in the part 1 follow-on paper. So based upon that, there's about a 1-month lag for this part 2 paper. All right, so with that, I don't know how we're doing on time, Rama, and I could take a question or two, I think, if we have time.
I think we're doing fine on time. We have 5 minutes left, so should be plenty of time for a couple of QAs. I don't see any questions typed in the chat window. The chat window has primarily talked about how the slides are not showing well and that sort of thing, mechanics. But if people have questions about content, you can either type there or raise your hand and speak.
Maybe we will move on to the next presentation. We can also address
I have
questions.
a raised hand here. I have a raised hand. Matthew Biddle, can unmute.
Yeah. I was curious where the best practices and recommendations, where is the plan to publish that?
We tossed around some options. It seems likely that Data Science Journal, which is what I mean by DSG, will be the likely publisher that we'll submit to, but we're still kind of negotiating some options for that.
And will that be coordinated with the Ocean Best Practices system?
I'm not aware of that system. Maybe you can enlighten us on that.
I might not be the best person to, but.
So we do have people, we do have some co-author contributors from the US CLIVAR Uncertainty Quantification Working Group, which might be knowledgeable about that system because there's definitely a strong oceanography component to that working group. But beyond that, I don't know the answer to your question.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think it's a resource where documentation on best practices with oceanographic data is a lot of it is collated at that location. I think there's a lot more to it, but I don't want to speak out of turn since I don't know a lot about it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I don't see any raised hands or requests for getting unmuted. So I guess we can move on to the next topic.
So David, if you stop sharing, I would share my screen.
Sounds good. I'll stop sharing. Thank you.
Hi, this is Bob Downs speaking, and I'm going to be talking today about international collaboration activities that the Information Quality Cluster is involved in. And basically, I'm going to talk about 3 activities, but we're certainly interested in hearing about more opportunities for international collaborations. And the 3 activities I'm going to talk about today are the Frontier Special Issue on Citizen Science Data, and the International Digital Curation Conference submission that we made. And then there's interest in leveraging the Information Quality Cluster guidance document that we're developing that Peng will be talking about from the Geodata Working Group. And so looking at the next slide, please. We had an opportunity come up in the fall where the editors of the Open Citizen Science Data and Methods special issue of Frontiers asked us if we could submit a commentary to that special issue. And so some of you might know the editors of that special issue, Ann Bowser, Alex DeSherbin, and Sven Schade, or Shade maybe, sorry. Anyway, we did submit initially, and it was a kind of a very short timeline we had, but we were submitting a commentary initially, and we had submitted that to the Environmental Science Journal of Frontiers. There's actually several journals involved in this open citizen science data and methods special issue. And after we submitted it, though, it was recategorized by the editors to the Frontiers in Climate. And so we just heard back from them about a week ago, and we received the recommendations from the peer reviewers. And since our article, or manuscript, I should say, was recategorized, it's now a perspectives article, and so it would be a lot longer than what we initially submitted. And the recommendations for improvement seem to reflect that, because we got lots of recommendations, and we would certainly otherwise go over the word length. So in terms of what we've done so far is we've talked about recruitment, selection, self-selection, and training for various contributors to a citizen science data project, and also talked about transparency for the information quality throughout the data production process, and then talk about documenting the data quality in terms of facilitating both discovery and reuse. And then we also touched on some rubrics for evaluating quality levels of citizen science data. Anyway, I should sum up on this by saying that they reviewers gave us a short timeline on this as well. And so we're scurrying about again, trying to get these modifications in place in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully we'll get that in and move forward with this. In terms of the next collaborative activity that we're involved in, we recently submitted a lightning talk to the 16th International Digital Curation Conference, known as IDCC 21. And there we're talking about documentation to foster sharing and use of open earth science data, in particular quality information. So in that proposal for the lightning talk, we are basically talking about enabling data reuse across various communities, and importantly to communities that aren't necessarily represented by the data that have been collected. And then talking about reducing the potential for data misuse. And also we're offering a reuse scenario on data integration. So we're hoping that lightning talk will be accepted. We're not sure when we'll hear from them. It's probably at least another month. So we're waiting eagerly. And then for our last collaborative activity, as you know, under Peng's leadership, we're working on this ESIP information quality guidance document. And there is this group on Earth observations. Many of you might be familiar with them. It's an international group of agencies, national agencies from various countries, as well as organizations, participating organizations. And more recently, in the last year or so, they brought in commercial organizations as well. And they establish working groups. And one of the working groups is the Geo Data Working Group. And under that, 3 subgroups have been established. One is on data ethics, one is on data management principles and data sharing principles, and the other one is on institute data. I should mention, though, that the data management principles and data sharing principles were developed over 5 years ago by other geo working groups in which we've been involved. And guidance for those have also been developed. And the data management principles and data sharing principles subgroup is continuing that work. But they're also interested in quality information. They want to, as well as providing a way for people to adopt the GIOS guidance of the GIOS data management principles and data sharing principles. They also are interested in leveraging the work that we're doing here on the guidance for information quality. So we're hoping that they'll be able to also provide some feedback to us on that as we move forward. And then I think this might be a good segue to lead to what Peng is going to talk about.
Thanks, Bob. Rama, is it time for a couple questions, or should I go to my presentation directly?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. David was the timekeeper for this section.
Yes, yes, we have
sorry.
about 3 minutes before the allotted time. So yes, there's time.
In the absence of any questions, I'll just mention that the GIOS data management principles and the GIOS data sharing principles have previously been reviewed and contributed to by ESIP over the last 4 or 5 years. And so this is an ongoing collaboration, we should really say.
Yeah, again, you can input the question in the chat room, in the chat, and as well as in the session Google Doc. As Bob has mentioned, the IQC has been in collaborating with other international organizations to develop guidelines on making dataset quality information fair. And for people who don't know me, my name is Payne. I go with Payne. I'm currently at University of Alabama in Huntsville, supporting NASA Marshall Space Flight Center impact program. And for the dataset quality, we actually mean the information about the quality of the state of the data and associate information. So it includes quality about the data, about the metadata, and as well as other associated information. And that's throughout the entire life cycle, including the data collections and the productions, and the data and metadata management, and the services, as well as the user support, and including user engagement. And the associated information, as I mentioned, including the instrument and method, and the software, and the state of the metadata, and the documentations, and as well as workflows, frameworks, etc. So I have the definition data and the data set at the end of the inside the document. If you would like to see some of the definition there, please feel free. For the context why we need dataset quality information to trust and stand and effective use of the data, I have listed a separate set of the slides at the end of this particular slide stack based on the AGU presentation. And here I'm just going to talk a little bit about the fact the capturing, curating, and representing data quality information is very difficult. a lot of reason for it. One is the information is normally lacking, and they may not be public available, even if it does, and they may not be in the consistent format, and it's very hard to integrate across system and tools. And also that the information is diverse, and the metadata content editors having to go to search and interpret the information into more structured metadata. So that's a lot of time is beyond their skill set. And the another one is too hard to integrate across systems because they are not curated or represented consistently. So solution is to have to produce data set quality information, and that's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. The question then is where to start. So to trying to address this challenge, and we have international domain expert come together to try to develop guidelines for earth science community. And this effort is coordinated and led by ESIP Information Quality Cluster. And our co-chairs and many members are part of that effort. And also from Barcelona Supercomputing Center Evaluation Quality Control Team. And that's part of the Copernicus Climate Services team. And another partner is the Australia and New Zealand Data Quality Interest Group. And I'm going to read for the object. That's to develop community guidelines with practical recommendations, and through a community-wide effort by international earth science domain expert to help stakeholders such as science data centers, repositories, data producers and publishers, data managers and stores. And the key goal is to capture and represent quality information of data set in a way that's in line with the fair guiding principles, and which is to allow for maximum trust, sharing, reuse, and increase value of data sets. And the optimal goal is to enable global access to an integration of data set quality information. So the actually, since I'm not in the presentation mode, so the initial discussion was started in September 2019, and we have agreed to have a workshop and before the ESIP summer meeting, and we did have a whole day virtual workshop because of pandemic. We have 2 live sessions, and the primary goal was to explore multidimensional data information quality and challenges, and define need, and explore current approaches that kick off the community guidelines. And the working group, ESIP Fair Data Set Quality Information Working Group, was formed and has been active since September 2020. And in the October, we have put out a pre-ESIP workshop summary that summarize the findings from the workshop along with the case statement for developing fair DQI. And then since the September, the working group has been diligently working to define the scope and develop the guidelines based on the community best practices and the current state of the workflows and procedures to capture data set quality information, and respond to a call for open science by Data Science Journal as a special collection open science collection, we have submitted a call to action statement paper and preprint. I have a link to preprint here if you're interested in looking at it more. So the currently we're in the last stage of developing guidelines and putting together a draft for a limited release, and eventually after that step we will have a wider review for the guidelines and before the guideline document baselines. In the timelines very tentative as everybody is volunteering on this effort. The currently is for the initial release for review is February and March, and the baseline we're hoping to in June and September. Time frame is really largely dependent on when we finish the community review. And it is without saying that all the work by the international domain expert, I have the working group, current working group members list here, and the names in bold are the workshop committee members. And if you are interested in getting involved, whether as contributing member or to review the guidelines, interested in review guidelines, please let me know or contact me at this email or put your email in the session document. So I'm going to stop here, and how I'm doing, do we have a time for a couple questions?
Yes, we do. We are 4 minutes shy of our transition point to the breakout. We do have a question from Don Collins in the chat box. So Don, would you care to speak to that?
Hi, Don.
Somebody has to unmute him probably.
Oh, it sounds like he doesn't have a microphone connection. So okay, so I'll just read the question aloud.
Okay.
He thanks you for your presentation, Peng, and he was curious if you could compare or contrast the DQI guidelines with prior data stewardship maturity matrix work.
Okay, so the prior data stewardship maturity work that focused on the stewardship aspect, and when we moved on to the second part, I will talk a little bit about the dimensions. And for this particular guidelines, we are interested to capture the whole life cycle that includes more than just stewardship maturity, what covered in the stewardship maturity. And there are many best practices captured in the data stewardship maturity metrics will be utilized for this work. The implementation best practices by Noaa One Stop, where you are aware, will also be utilized in this guidance documentation as examples. Does that answer your question?
He says yes in the chat box.
Great.
And he thanks you. Okay, so we have about maybe 2 more minutes left before our transition point.
Maybe I will just move on, and anybody has a question, put in the chat box, and we can discuss it in the second part. So the second part, the
Oh, Peng, just a quick comment I want to make.
Sure.
If somebody could post a link to the Google Docs notes page.
I just did. I read your mind, Rama. The other thing too, the other reason why I did that is because our attendance just ballooned to about 44 people since we started the session. When we started the session, I think we had 20 people. We've got 30 some odd names on the attendance list. So if you recently joined the session, I did post the Google Docs link in the chat box. If you could just go to the top of that document, you'll see attendance and check-in. If you could just add your name there, that'd be wonderful. Thank you so much.
And again, all the links are in the Google Doc as well. And I have posted them in the chat at the initial, for the slides, if you don't have access to the session document. So I don't see the, so once I'm in the share mode, I don't really see anything. I think that kind of concludes our presentation. And again, if anybody has additional question, just post in the chat. And we will move on to the breakout session then.
Yes, and there was one more question that came up from Tyler Christensen. I don't know if we have time, Peng, to answer that one, but I did capture it in the notes. So maybe we can just position that offline if you want to.
Maybe you can repeat, and then
Sure.
if it's something fast, I can just address. Otherwise, we can do it later.
Yes, so the question states, we're working on, so again, this is from Tyler Christensen at Noaa. It says that we're working on Noaa's implementation plan for the Information Quality Act, a requirement for all US federal agencies. We will need to evaluate and document data quality for our high impact data sets. Other federal agencies also working, so he's wondering if there are other federal agencies that are also working on this initiative.
You mean initiative for this particular effort?
For the Information Quality Act, which is I guess a requirement for all federal agencies to implement.
Yeah, I think the for the high influential, that's by USGDR global, for the national assessment part, and they have been working on that for over a decade. And for the evidence part, I think this one would come really handy in terms of reporting, because it's trying to make it more structured and a consistent way to report quality, and that can be readily integrated into other tools and system, and make it the data more usable and reusable. And Tyler, please feel free to reach me offline, and if that doesn't answer your question or you want to discuss further, that's a very good question. So, okay, that concludes the presentation part. The next part, we're going to have a breakout and discussion, and I'm going to have this the dataset quality dimension short introduction to set and to set the stage for it. Part of the background for this particular part is for that the FAIR dataset quality information guidelines, and we would like to generate a terminology that's like community consensus, because that's having the semantic and consistent terminology is the one way to make what we are trying to do interoperable. And then the one particular aspect is to describe dataset lifecycle stages. So for what we trying to do is here to, based on the quality dimension that's defined by a paper led by Rama in 2017 as part of IQC effort, to define the quality dimension as a science that focus on how well the algorithm or method that has been defined, developed, or validated for intended use. And in the next part, so this part will be about 15-20 minutes, and we're going to focus on review of the stages. The next part, Bob would talk, trying to focus on the attributes for each stage or each dimension. So for the product part, it's kind of focus on how well the product being produced, accessed, and utilized. So this will be sort of like looking at the first use. And for the stewardship part, that deals with how well the data has been preserved, managed, and accessed. And for the use service, that's without saying is the focus on how well data has been serviced and supported and reused, and sometimes go into the improved. So those are very high level, and I know it's difficult to talk about it in the 5 minutes. And Rama's paper, I have a reference there. If you're interested in learn more about it, please to turn to his paper. So for each
I put mail in.
Okay, I can hear people talking. Please mute yourself if you don't talk. For the stage part, what we're trying to do is to define 3 most critical stage during of the life cycle stage of data sets for that particular dimension. And sometimes they may be in sequence, sometimes they may not. And I would understand there will be more than one stage, more than 3 stages, but we're trying to identify 3 ones that's the most critical for that particular dimensions. So I have the 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, 3 stages for each set. And one question we would like to ask your feedback is, do you see any important stages missing from the list? And I do have a table in the document, the session document, and depends how, if we wanted to have breakout rooms, have a smaller group, we could actually work together, put in that table, or we can have a breakout room to discuss in more detail. And then another second part question is the naming, and some seems to be fairly stable, and some may still need to tweak a little bit. And there are other data lifecycle stage as well, and we want a consistent. And that depends on what you're familiar with workflow in terms of producing data, serving data. Then you may use a different term, and we wanted to have a community consensus for that particular one. So I'm going to stop sharing because I don't really see anything what I do. Then we're going to kind of have a quick discussion in terms whether we would like to have it work together, or we will be more interested in have a breakout. We have about 39 people. Perhaps we can break out like 5 or 4 rooms.
And Peg, would it make sense to maybe have one of the co-chairs in each of the rooms?
It will, and I don't know how whether that make it the making breakout room more difficult.
Okay. Did you want to direct people to the section of the notes page where you have that table for people to provide input? We already got one suggestion from Chantel suggesting a stage naming. So maybe you could provide some guidance on that.
Yeah, okay. So how's the time we have for this segment? I think, Bob?
Yes, we still have 12 minutes.
12 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we'll have a 6 minutes breakout room. Let's do maybe 4, let's see. To make it easier, maybe we'll just do the 4 break rooms and just randomly select. If we can have 1 co-chair in each breakout room, that would be great, but it's not very critical because I think attendees can based on their experience. Okay, so we'll have a breakout room for 6 minutes. Then we're gonna come back, review for about 5-6 minutes. So Chen, can you make breakout room for us?
No, I couldn't, but I think. Yeah, okay, you are muted.
Sorry about that. Yes. I am creating, you wanted 4 people per room or 4 rooms?
4
I
rooms.
think 4 rooms will be a good one to
Okay.
have.
Do we have only 6 minutes? Because it looks like the schedule has the breakout rooms going until 2:50, not 2:30.
We have a second part that's for the quality attributes. So we may have, so for this section, segment, we're gonna have like 20 minutes total. So for
Okay.
we probably have
So-
like 10 minutes or so.
Okay, so I will bring you guys back in 6 minutes.
Yes, please.
Uh,
Thank you.
yes.
What is
Don, I know you're on the phone, so you won't be able to, I don't think you'll be able to go into, or that's right. There you go.
Hi, is anyone in this room lobby right now? I got disconnected. Can you send me back to breakout room 4?
Actually, the breakout rooms are closing.
Okay.
It was the end of the session.
Yeah,
End of that
something
particular
went
session.
wrong. A couple of people dropped out for some reason.
Fine.
Are we back in the main room now already?
Yeah, we got kicked out.
We got kicked out. Okay. So we got the chance to discuss only one row.
Rama, I think you are muted.
Oh,
I'm hearing Rama fine.
yeah. Oh,
Oh.
probably I'm not back in the room properly. I don't know.
I hear you
Yeah.
now.
Okay, so there was probably some delay in my getting back to the room.
Yeah, so Peng, what Rama was touching on was that they only had enough time to address one of the rows, and I think that
That's
we
fine.
are kind of in the same boat on group
Yeah,
3.
I think the idea is to do the ones you're most familiar with. And like in our break room, we had a very nice discussion in terms of various different stage in different dimensions. It's more of a conversation rather than the comments. So I see here the group. So for the group 3, says talk about assess. Needs to have we assess instrumentation before getting to the product stage. So would the validate equivalent to that?
It could. I will defer to Sean, who was the one that brought that one up, to see if that's sufficient.
So this is just something I'm loosely familiar with because I work more in the quality control world, which is in your product side. But whenever I deal with quality control and quality assessment, those two terms, I always get people discussing the fact that instrumentation has to be assessed before it goes in the field to make sure that it's actually measuring what you think it should be measuring.
Yes.
And that whole level of assessment is done in that first science stage that you're talking about.
Yes.
I don't know if it actually falls under what you call define, or if it goes under what you call validate, because I'm not as familiar with the work that you all have written up. So I don't know where these terms came from.
So it's definitely under the validate. Again, whether we see in the product, we have assess as well. So we're trying to distinguish the two. The validate is a validate instrument, validate the method. In the second part, we're going to looking at the attributes. There we'll be talking about accuracy, precision, and see define the fitness for purpose. So for the validation is really are the instrument and algorithm doing what you are intended to before they are in, for example, satellite, and the instrument needs to be validated before they put it into use. And in the product assess part, it's almost like evaluation. We kind of just say focusing on the processing aspect, and when you produce a product and you want to see how good that product is in comparison to other ones. So the validate in a way is to validate a set of baseline, and assess is to almost like compare with other similar product, see whether they are equivalent. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does, but I'm thinking you might, as a community, want to go back and revisit those kind of global terms, because what you're talking about as assessment is what I know of as quality control. So if you look at the definitions of quality assessment versus quality control, they are not one and the same. They're not interchangeable.
Well, for the quality control, in my mind, I'm just talking here. It's
fine.
really to ensure your product is produced in the right way. But maybe we use the evaluating instead of assess here. It's
that might be a better, broader term in your product. Yeah.
So potentially we could have here assess and here have the evaluate, something like that.
I mean, that would make more sense to me. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself.
Yeah. Thanks for that feedback. And what we're trying to capture is different domain or different project, even disciplines. They may use different terms for that particular purpose.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's probably where I'm coming from, because I come from the in situ world. And I think a lot of the folks like Dave and all you are in the satellite world, and validate might mean something different in the satellite world than the in situ world. So
that's true. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I do have another related question, Peng, just following up from Sean, is that I think typically, especially going back to Rama's paper that you referenced in your presentation, typically, when we think about data set lifecycle stages, at least coming from the world that I come from, although I will admit to Sean that we are gradually getting more into in situ and suborbital types of data sets that we're distributing. We're getting our feet wet there as well. But coming from that data stewardship, data repository world, when we think of data set lifecycle, we typically think of it from a post-deployment perspective rather than a pre-deployment perspective. What I mean by that is, by the time that the instrumentation is deployed, all of the pre-deployment instrumentation assessment and evaluation stuff usually goes into the defining of what's sort of the level of precision of the instrument. All those instrument characteristics normally are fed into that defining of your level 1 requirements, for example. So Sean, I don't know if that relates to the in situ world too much, but I do know from a remote sensing, satellite remote sensing world, there is a similar stage that they go through as well, where they do a pre-deployment, even before launch, they'll assess the instrumentation before it even goes into space. But that's not necessarily something that a data repository would really get into. Usually that stuff is kind of done behind the scenes, and I don't know that we want to necessarily micromanage that, but I mean, or define that for them, because every instrument team kind of has their own workflow. But I just wanted to really just try to think about what's really the right transition point for us to start coming in from an informatics perspective.
That's a very good point, David. And here, one thing to keep in mind is the data set lifecycle. It's not the data. Going back to institution, and I wonder, so if we're thinking about measuring temperature and humidity and instrument, it's already development that, the algorithm going to measuring using whatever instrument, should that be part of the data set life cycle? Or as David said, we taking the characteristic of the instrument, for example, what's the precision for measuring temperature or humidity, and use that to define the data product that we will be developing based on the measurement. I guess that's something to think about.
Yeah, it is. And I kind of see what Dave's saying about the scope of where this community starts. In the in situ world, it is not uncommon for the people that manage the data to actually be the people that deploy the instruments, and make decisions on what sensors and stuff go out, to do this. But going to your question, I do believe, yes, tracking the algorithms used to do those calculations somehow is very important. Now, you may be able to get to that by just knowing you used a Vaisala instrument versus an RM Young instrument to measure your temperature and humidity. If you know the device or the type, make, and model, you may be able to trace back to the humidity algorithm that's used by that sensor. But they are different. There's clear issues with different manufacturers using different algorithms, and it will impact the data the user gets.
Yeah,
so tracking that as part of the data lifecycle is important.
Yeah, I think a lot of also is at the implementation level, and it will be good to touch on the different domain as examples. So potentially we may reach out to you to have you review the guidelines if you do have a time to be sure that guidelines is applicable to the in situ community as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to draw a distinction between the pre-deployment assessment versus the post-deployment, because there's assessments that happen at both stages of deployment.
I was gonna mention that, and I saw, I think in one of the slides, that you're working with the Australia, New Zealand folks, and actually I think they're all part of the IMOS project, the Integrated Marine Observing System in Australia. They actually have some really good people in the instrumentation assessment side of things in terms of understanding those procedures and all. So might be a group to reach out to.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you. in the interest of time, I think we have a couple more to go. Bob, are you keeping time or?
So I didn't want to interrupt the good discussion, and then I found myself muted anyway.
Okay.
But yeah, we are out of time. But if it's valuable, we might want to continue with these at least to identify these or discuss these issues that have been identified. And I was actually in group 1, so I could quickly give you an overview of what we talked about there. We actually talked about a few things beginning at the very top of the science, in the science stage here. I have to bring that up on my screen now so I can see it. So
do you want me to stop the sharing, or are you okay looking at my screen?
If you just scroll up a little, that's fine. So under science, we discussed whether refine might be between define and collect. So that idea is that we've defined what we're going to do, and we might want to then refine our instruments, if you will, and then the other question is how does collect fit in there? Is that under develop, part of develop? And so would that be, the refinement be right before the develop, and or even collection in between as well?
The collect, it's probably pertain to observations, but for other like derived product or model data, it would not be as relevant.
I see. So it might depend on the type of data that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, collection and observations come before data sets are developed. So if you're talking about data set quality, probably the focus should be on the definition of science and algorithms and what's done with the observations as opposed to observations themselves.
Maybe a better word would be aggregate, which could encompass both observational data and model data, whether it's true observational data or not. At some point, the data needs to be, available to the product producer that's producing the products that come from that data source.
I see. So in the interest of time, I'm going to quickly move down to the other two suggestions from group 1. And one was regarding stewardship. And the question is, wouldn't stewardship be applicable to all stages across all dimensions? And the individuals who were raising that might want to elaborate on that a little bit, if I'm not categorizing this correctly.
No, I think that was perfect. I think this was an effort to kind of get at what Sean Smith was just talking about in terms of ensuring, instrument and the instrument level metadata and information is getting propagated through the entire life cycle. And so my thought was maybe this process is too linear, and it needs to be kind of abstracted out a little bit. I don't know if I'm thinking of this all wrong, but the stewardship part needs to be incorporated into all aspects because we need to ensure that the information is being propagated along.
Yeah, I was thinking of something similar to that, but more in terms of like a feedback loop, because there's certain stages, say under stewardship or product, that might feed back all the way down to science again. and kind of this continuous feedback loop as well. So that's one thing I think we should try to explore at a later point.
Great. And then for the last recommendation from group one, it's under use and services. And that's asking really whether user feedback is, since it kind of pertains to use generally, whether that is applicable throughout the entire process. And in case I'm not elaborating on that appropriately, the individuals who brought that up might want to further elaborate.
Yeah, I think it does. Feedback loop. That's something. I think it's will be good to describe, emphasized on.
I see.
Yeah, I'm looking at the time, Bob. I
Yeah.
think we definitely want to move on to your part of review. Because we only have 20 minutes and we wanted to work on the quality attributes. Thanks everybody for contributing, and we definitely would look at it and potentially reach back to you if additional discussion is needed. The Bob would lead the quality characteristic part, and that may kind of answer some of the questions come up. And we will need 5 minutes for the 3 takeaways. So unfortunately, I'm sorry I cut your part short a little bit. So I'm going to pull your slides.
Okay.
And maybe you give a quick recap.
Yes.
And we move on to the breakout rooms.
Surely. So what we're looking at here are the same data set quality dimensions that Bing initially described for us: science, product stewardship, and user services, and then the data set lifecycle stages that fit within each of these. And so we just talked about how those are being currently represented, and how we might elaborate on them more, or even add more categories. But within each of these categories, well, I should say within each of the dimensions, we have different attributes for data quality that we might be looking at. So for example, under science, we might be asking questions about the accuracy or the precision or the uncertainty or the validity of the data in terms of data quality, as well as the suitability or fitness for purpose, as you will, if you will. And then likewise, some examples under product are the data accurate, complete, and up to date? And what about the metadata and the provenance of the data, as well as any error sources and the applicability of the data in terms of developing a product to be used? And then under stewardship, some examples are metadata, format conformance, standard compliance, data management, and preservation practices. And then finally, under user services, some examples of attributes for data quality might be accessibility of the quality information, the timeliness of it, the user feedback-based metadata updates, that is, if you received some feedback and as a result you're updating the metadata, and then continuing updates over time as users are getting experience with the data and providing feedback as well. And so these are some examples, but what we would like to do is to identify additional examples that anyone might come up with, or these groups might come up with, so that we can then look into how we might be able to include those in the guidelines.
So Bob, would you like people to enter in this table in the session document for the stages they are most comfortable playing with, or
Yeah.
you would like to have a break room for like 5 minutes?
Yeah, I think because of the shortness of time at this point, that we might want to just stay in this group so that we're not losing time switching.
Okay.
So if we could, if identify some examples of data quality attributes that we might begin to describe under any of these different life cycle stages, or if they pertain to a dimension itself, such as science or product, we could think of it in terms of the whole quality dimension. But the important thing is to identify some attributes that we can then begin to include in the data quality guidelines. So if anyone has any suggestions, we would certainly be glad to hear them. Or if there are suggestions in terms of any of the examples we talked about, that is, they might be too general and we really need to break them down into more precise characteristics for the guidance. That would also be very valuable here.
Bob, it may be good to copy and paste what you had on the slide into into this table.
Okay, I could do that.
Probably, I don't think you need to split them under define, develop, validate, and things like that. But under, anywhere randomly in one of these rows.
Oh, something.
Let me break them into add another section. Okay.
Yeah, I've got to get to the slides then.
I'm not sure I'm totally understanding, I guess, what the ultimate goal is, but per my comment, both in the first breakout room and just in the chat, I do feel like a lot of the quality characteristics that are listed under science would occur like under use and services. I think that as science uses data, a lot of this, I just don't think like pre-product, we know all of this. So I think it just kind of speaks to that whole feedback loop, and that these aren't really linear. They aren't necessarily linear steps, but I think it's just important to note that at least those quality characteristics, I think, that are listed under science are certainly things that could also be listed under use and services.
I see. So you're thinking that this is too linear in a way?
Well, I mean, I understand why you want to develop like this life cycle, and I guess it's just, to me, I don't know how we want to represent it, but it almost feels a little bit like use and services. It feels like just kind of like we make these little minor updates to data after it's published. But in our experience at NSIDC, we've found that quality type issues come up after the data are published, and it often requires quite a, there's a lot of science behind that. And sometimes it does require sort of reconciling that information, kind of going back to the beginning of the, I guess, data set life cycle. So
yes, user feedback comes in, and that feeds into science. And that's why you have reprocessing and multiple versions of products get produced.
Mm-hmm.
And they get reevaluated and next version happens and so on. So that's definitely a feedback loop.
So, yeah, I'm taking a couple notes here that regarding those comments so that we
Yeah.
make it clear that the feedback loop has to be quite explicit within the guide.
I do wanted to add, they are not linear and they're not necessarily in sequence, depends on, different workflows we're working on. However, to make it more structured, one needs to define certain terms, and that will be, useful to the most domains or disciplines. And another part to think about is that they might have something important throughout the life cycle, and then the question is where they fit most critical. For example, for science, the accuracy decisions are important. However, the information about them might be more important to stewardship than the how make them available to users. That's more important to use and services of the data set. And so the another perspective is to distinguish is activities. So we have this very complicated and sometimes the same information may be generated the information may be important to several dimensions. And then what we're trying to do here is to really to discretize a very complicated process or workflow. And then, doesn't matter what we do, it's not going to be 100% accurate. However, if we have a consensus that represents most of the workflows or processes, and we can use that to represent information, quality information, and that would help in turn for the interoperability part. So that's part of the what we're trying to do here. And we may not capture or the everything in these particular stages, because there are other stages will be useful or beneficial. And another part is that unless we have something that's semantic consistent, and it will be hard for us to capture in an interoperable way the information we're trying to capture. And I hope that's helpful in term answer your question.
And we certainly have some good points made in the chat as well.
Okay.
Karen Moe just made a good point. I don't know, Karen, if you wanted to elaborate on that a little, or?
I don't see chat. Maybe you can export into this. So I'm okay to stay a little on, but I think for the session to respect other people's time, I'm going to move on to the closing part, and for Rama and David to take away for the 3 takeaways. And then, if people are, if they're, people have time and interested in stay on, we can have additional discussion on those. Will that work for you, Bob?
Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, somebody will definitely have to save the chat window because there are a lot of good things that are posted there.
Yeah.
Um,
So let me go to agenda. Oh, cool. We already have people. Oh, great. Okay. Rama, you want to?
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
actually was the one that started populating this, as much as I'm aware, but Rama, if you want to take the lead and go through some of this, I just tried to jot down what stood out as significant.
This is
from
great.
the session.
Thanks a lot, David.
So where is it?
So this is the in agenda, last part of agenda.
Yeah,
Are you
I
looking
see,
at
I
that
see
section?
that.
Okay.
Well, there are comments and questions.
Yeah.
And in the takeaways area is where we have to have stuff, right? So there are 3 takeaways before session close. Okay, that's where we need to. So what did we, I think we need to answer these questions. So what did we discover by meeting this, by this meeting? Would anybody want to comment on that? How about importance of feedback loops in the dimensions and
Yeah.
life cycle stages?
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. We definitely would describe that in the guidelines and to emphasize that exist in our stage and important for our stage, and also the steps. It's not linear process.
Okay. Anything else under importance of, anything else under what did we discover?
Rama, are you looking at the that section part, the note?
I'm looking at the thing that starts with capture 3 takeaways and shared insights. And there are
Okay,
questions.
and
Questions listed there.
in the agenda part?
In the agenda part.
Yeah, Rama, you're going to have to scroll up a little higher to see
Yeah.
what's been populated.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
David has already put it in there.
Oh, okay, okay. I need to go up there then. Oh, what's the main thing? Where it says, yeah, 3 takeaways. What's the main thing that you learned today? Okay,
Right, so we already covered A. We covered the first one.
okay, okay. So while we cover, okay. Be careful to separate the time. Okay, fine. So the second one is what knowledge and resources do we have to share? Ocean best practices, that's a good one that came up on the chat. Anything else in terms of knowledge and resources?
Yeah, I think a few different articles have been posted in the chat.
Okay,
That are
we can
valuable.
we can copy and paste them in here later.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some comment about the connection to Australians in New
Yeah.
Zealand. So
Yeah.
I think we should capture that here.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'll just put a placeholder here. Connection regarding
I think it was IMOS, the Integrated Marine Ocean System. I believe that's the acronym.
It's Leslie here from Australia.
Oh,
Somebody
hi.
mentioned IMOS. I was wondering if they could put in the chat the IMOS work they're referring to, because I'd love to follow it up after this.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
I'll definitely make a connection with them, but someone needs, whoever mentioned it needs to put it in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
If you're still here. Otherwise, I've got enough connections in IMOS so I can track it down.
Okay. So anything else about knowledge and resources we have to share? Not hearing anything. We'll go on to the next question. Important remaining questions. Okay. So looks like David has captured a couple of things here already. How do we characterize feedback loop between dimensions and life cycle stages within dimensions? Okay. What makes pre-deployment instrumentation assessment a critical consideration for data management managers?
Yeah, those
Okay,
are
those are
good
good things to capture.
yeah.
Yes, excellent.
Okay, I think we are at the hour of 12 p.m. here in Pacific time, which is the end point for the session. So if you have other comments you want to make, the Google Doc should be available for people. And hopefully somebody will copy and capture and save the chat window. Who
Yes,
is
I
doing-
did.
Okay, great.
Oh, thank you.
No problem.
All right.
Do you want me email you?
How is that best handled? How are they doing it in the other sessions? Are they pasting it under
Okay.
the, are they putting it in a linkable place and then putting it in the notes?
I can save it. It will save as a text file.
Most groups are putting those at the back of the notes. It's actually got a space. If you go down in the Google Notes template, it's got please paste chat here.
Oh, okay. That's what we should do.
Oh, yeah.
That's what other groups have done that I've been in.
Yes, that's what we should do. I think somebody has posted here already, or pasted here. Yeah.
Okay, I can paste the chat into the Google Doc.
Yes, I see it here.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank
Peng,
you, everybody.
want
Thank
to-
you, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.